Okay. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we're all meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I am here on Dharawal country of the Wadi Wadi people, and this is country that I live and work on, but it's not my country as a Yorta Yorta woman. So I just want to acknowledge those that have looked after the land and those that continue to look after the land. So I'm sure you are all on, if you're in Australia, or you're on Indigenous country, and in other countries as well, you possibly are always standing on Aboriginal or Indigenous country. So, sorry, there's people coming thick and fast, sorry. So this is a drop-in session. I can tell you, I just want to give you a heads up, we won't be talking about assessment 1 because we're still in the process of marking assessment 1. We are going to try and get assessment 1 marks back to you within 2 weeks from the submission date. If you have an extension, that may be slightly more challenging, and there's a large number of people that have sought an extension. So we are going to do our best, but we will make sure at the very least we have them back within 3 weeks. So this session's not a session to talk about assessment 1. Please wait for your feedback and then we can have a conversation about that. So how's everyone going with this subject? Does anyone want to share with me what their biggest take-home message to date has been? I am going to actually ask you guys to talk, so this will be an interactive session. Otherwise, there's not much point us all sitting here for an hour.
Oh, answer that one, Summer. I'm really enjoying the way the subject is set up so that we're actually learning by doing.
Good.
I really like it. And I love the way the assessments actually all link in with each other and build on each other. So like they're not just like one-offs for the sake of it. It's actually worthwhile and meaningful as you go along. So I'm appreciating that.
Fantastic. I did not set this subject up. This is the first time I've taught it, so I can't take credit for that, although I would love to, but I will definitely pass that on to Lynn Phillipson, who set this subject up. We have made some minor changes, but nothing substantive. And I absolutely agree with you. I really like the way that the assessments in particular are set up. I did that with a previous subject. I made them iterative. So every time you got feedback, you could take it on board and improve the next assessment. So I'm really glad that you appreciate that as well. How do other people feel about the way the subject is set up in terms of the learning by doing?
I am really like this subject because this research method is new to me. I am new to this subject. In the beginning, I felt some confusion, and later on, I will pick up.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, even me, because research kind of seems, the word actually puts some fear in mind that they need something very extraordinary, very vast, very something that not up to the average grade people, the students. So what I felt. But after like doing the assessment 1, I was very afraid. I was talking to Patty, like I think I need the extension. And she's like, if you're lacking behind, and I'm not suggesting you to have a extension. So based on her, and I did like help from Robin as well. So I think I'm pretty much on, and I'm like, I never thought of to be in research, but it's like, very good to know how the way research goes on. So it's nice to have this here.
Yeah. For those that are in my class, you would have heard me speak this last workshop about how even if you're not interested in being a researcher per se, if you are working in the industry, understanding when you're reading a peer-reviewed article about the quality of research and being able to use your newly developed research skills to assess other people's research is excellent, particularly if you're going to work in whatever field you're working in, whether it's social work, public health, or occupational health and safety. If you can look at the most available, the most up-to-date available evidence and critique it and understand what's going to work for your clients or within your workplace, then this subject has definitely achieved something. So if you're not going to be a researcher, that doesn't matter. You're still going to have some take-home skills. So thank you for that. Appreciate that. And I'm sorry that research scares you, but that is often the case with people. But it doesn't have to, because if we keep it manageable, we keep it small, we can make research achievable at beginning stages. And then as you grow your skills, undertake more complex research. So how is everyone else finding it? So Can everyone use their reactions? So there's reactions on the bottom of the on the bottom of your Zoom. Can everyone? Yep, thank you for that. I only use a reaction after I ask a question though, because I'm going to get a sense of who has actually done all of the modules 1 to 4 for weeks 1 and 2. Okay. So not everyone's done all the modules from week 1 and 2. Those of you that have, congratulations, love your work. That's fantastic. The modules from week 1 and 2 were actually set up and designed to actually assist you to do assessment 1. So if you haven't done it, wait till you get your feedback from us. And if you don't get a mark that you're happy with, I highly encourage you to actually do those modules. For those of you that are in my class, you're going to hear me say some of the same things that I've said probably to you guys, is that you're all adults, you're mature age students. This is the second time you're doing a degree. We appreciate that life gets in the way. We know that you've got kids, you've got work commitments, you've got other family commitments, but whatever you put into this subject, you get out. So if you do the work, you're going to get good marks. If you don't do the modules, your marks are going to reflect that. So it's really up to you how well you do in this subject. Because this is self-directed learning. We're not here to hold your hand and make you do it. We provide the opportunities and then it's up to you to do it. And if you don't have time, we appreciate that as well, but your marks are likely to reflect that. Can anyone talk to me about, does anyone want to talk about a specific module that they wanted to ask some questions about? Is there any modules in particular that, or any components of a module people were unsure about and needed some advice?
Samna, may I?
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to know about ethnography.
Right. Sorry, I'm just letting someone in. So what I'm going to suggest, if you've got really specific questions about specific methodologies, we try to give you an introduction to each of the methodologies, but I highly encourage you to access the library to look at that. I'm not an expert in ethnography. It's not the research that I tend to do. I have a good understanding of it, but I would highly encourage you, and I'm really sorry that I'm giving you a not very specific answer, but if there is a methodology that you're really interested in, jump on the library website and do a bit of a search. That's the best way to actually start to understand a methodology, is by doing the research yourself.
Okay, thanks.
It's all right. So the last module, I'm just having a look at week 4, methods and methodologies. So can anyone tell me what the difference between a method and a method? Can anyone tell me what a method is?
Hi, I'm
Yeah.
happy to start the conversation.
Thank you.
So according to the module, to what we've reviewed, method is the techniques we use to collect the data that we're going to use for research, right?
Fantastic.
So it could
Textbook
be
answer.
that you use a survey, or that you use a poll, or that you use, I don't know, observation methods, right? So that's the method.
Now, if no one's going to speak up, thank you for putting that in the, what have we got here? Sorry. Yacha has just put something in the chat. Methodology is the process. Is anyone, can anyone else elaborate on methodology and what that means? We've just got process, which is a good start. Hi, Lisa. Oh, you're breaking up, Lisa. Do you want to just turn your camera off? That might help. Sorry. Oh, you're really breaking up, Lisa. Sorry, Lisa, you're frozen now. Sorry, mate. It's I think the weather is playing up. It's raining here in Illawarra. Do you mind saying that again, Lisa? Because it really broke up for us. Claire's got here that it's an overarching strategy, which is qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methodology. Yep.
I said it was. I said it was also systematic plan.
Yep. So Lisa, I'm really sorry. You're going to have to turn your camera off and just speak to it without your camera on, I think, because it's breaking up.
Okay.
Try it again. It's okay. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Thank you very much.
Yes, it was at a systematic plan.
Yep, it is the plan. And we've got a
Did you hear
couple.
that?
Yep, I did. Thank you. Definitely a plan. And we've got a couple of other people here. Varasha said explains our approach towards the research question. Yes. Rabina's put content analysis, categorization, discussing the meanings of words, phrases, and sentences. Content analysis, it's not a tool, it's an analysis, it's an analysis method. And a way of explaining how research could be carried out. Yeah. So all of these things. So what it basically boils down to is almost like the philosophy that underpins your research. So there's a range of different methodologies that underpin your philosophy that then help dictate your tools. So if we're thinking about assessment 2, sorry, does anyone else want to add anything to around methodology or methods or ask any questions from module 6? Can everyone use their reactions and just indicate who's done module 6 from last week? Okay. I think I counted 4 people that have done module 6. Can I just ask why people have come to the session today? Let's start with Mohammed. Why have you come to the session today? Okay. Lovepreet, why have you come to the session today? Someone want to jump in and tell me why they've come today?
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Awesome. Who's that? Sorry.
No, it's Abba. I'm just driving at the moment, so I've got.
Oh, hello. How are you?
Yeah, good. I understand that I've got a bit of catch up to do in terms of the module, or the modules, sorry, and I just kind of came to kind of get an understanding of the best way to kind of go about once I complete the modules, how to kind of go about my assessments and research and whatnot.
Sure. Yep. Fantastic. I'm getting a sense that most people have a bit of catch up to do. Does someone else want to jump in and tell me why they've come today?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I came. I've thought if I dropped into the session today, I would get a bit of more knowledge around the subject. Yeah.
Okay. Because what we're hoping these drop-in sessions are going to be is, oh, sorry.
I've just completed the.
Go, Michelle.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say, I've just completed module 7, and I thought that's what we might be discussing today, or hoping to. And I'm just really interested in exploring that concept a little bit more about the difference between qualitative and quantitative research, especially around the deductive and the inductive type of thinking. Because it's real. I'm just thinking now, even as I've been doing my research plan, that's probably an area that I've been weak in, is understanding that.
What's your background, Michelle? Because I'm not. Are you doing a Master of Social Work, Public Health, or Occupational Health and Safety?
Yeah, Master of Public Health.
Okay, cool. Yep, you're in my discipline. Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to come back to that because that's a great question. So I might just see how other people have joined today, because I'm trying to get a sense of how this is a drop-in session, guys. So I'm trying to get a sense of what it is you want from me. Jamila?
Yes, so yesterday night I have a look for the module 6 about decolonization, but it's not so clear for me. So I hope I will get more clear information about it.
Sure. Module 6 we'll talk about in one of the workshops, but not module
Decolonizing methodologies.
Week 6. That is also my area of expertise. That is my area of expertise. So it's in week 6 rather than module 6. So it's module
Weekly module 6, I think. No,
it's module 8 in week 6.
Sorry. Okay.
No.
Week 6. I'm sorry. Week 6. Decolonizing methodologies. Sorry.
No, that's all right. You had me worried then. I thought I was, yeah. Anyone else want to tell me while they're here? Okay, well, let's go back to Michelle's question around inductive and deductive as a qualitative method. So, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, you're referring to qualitative methods which are analysing text-based data? So it could be
so I'm just looking at like that
Sorry, go.
Oh, sorry, I went to turn off my camera again, Summer, because as soon as I put my camera on, everyone breaks up. So I'll just keep talking to you, but I have my camera off.
No
Sorry, I was just thinking about that difference in the table that is in module 7, where it has one column for quantitative and one column for quantitative and qualitative. And yeah, just that second row talking about inductive and deductive thinking, and like, you know, one you're kind of coming top down and the other you're going sort of from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And you're kind of being open-minded and thinking about it and being open to ideas and thinking about then how that helps you to choose the methods and what you're actually, you know, what the purpose of your research question is in a way, because once you choose quantitative or qualitative, you're changing the flavour of your research question. So it's really like understanding the actual aims of your question.
Yeah, so it's a really good question around inductive and deductive. So for those that don't know, and Michelle did give a really good description, inductive is where you actually do it with no framework. You're coming from the bottom up, you're looking at the data that you have, and it's completely, you're creating the themes as you or the codes that you use for qualitative as you go. So often people who do that use grounded theory. The other one is deductive. So, and I've often used it a blend of deductive and inductive. So deductive is where you're coming at it with a framework already. So for example, you might be looking at it from a critical race theory lens, which has a framework around how it's perceiving the text in relation to power dynamics in particular based on race. So you could also do, it depends on the theory and how you're looking at it. So again, I've just given you 2 theories to describe, and if you want to look at these theories, I suggest you go and actually look, do a bit of a search on the library database, because they're both very well-known theories. And so, as I said, so inductive is where you're coming at it with and using the data to drive the codes, and you're grouping them together, and it's an iterative process, and you never get it right the first time. There's multiple ways of actually looking at something, and then you refine it over time. And the other way is coming at it with a framework. So, and when you apply that, so let's just say that you do semi-structured interviews. So when you're applying that from a semi-structured interview point of view, you go out, you do your interviews, say you do 5 interviews, you then get them transcribed. So the interviews then become text. So you can do it inductively, which means that you're going through and developing themes and codes. So codes usually are grouped underneath a theme. So you're doing it in a way that allows the data to drive it, or you can actually use a framework that's been already established, and you can use the framework to pull out the codes relevant to that. So for example, in the work that I'm doing at the moment, we're looking at developing best practice commissioning guidelines for Indigenous health and wellbeing programs. So it's a multi-stage project, and in one of our stages, we've interviewed people that are involved in the commissioning of evaluations in one way or shape or form. So there are the commissioners, that is the people that purchase and pay for the evaluation. We're interviewing evaluators about the commissioning and how they feel about the commissioning, and then the services that are being evaluated, how they feel about the commissioning. So what we're actually doing is inductive and deductive thematic analysis with that, whereby we're using a framework that is considered best practice around the evaluation per se. It wasn't designed for commissioning, but what we want to see is the principles that are designed for evaluation, whether or not they're in the commissioning process. And then we're actually doing inductive themes as well to look at what's happened. So for example, the deductive codes, I think there's 13 of them, and they're things like Indigenous engagement, cultural capability, self-determination. And then the inductive stuff that's coming up is things like time. So there isn't enough time built into the commissioning to actually do culturally safe evaluations. So we're doing both inductive and deductive. Michelle, does that make sense? So I've talked at a broader level, but then at a thematic analysis.
That's really useful, thank you.
Okay.
Yep. But which brings me on to the next question, because you also started talking about theories then, and like there are so many theories out there, and of course as soon as we choose one theory, we're then not using other theories. So how do we go about working out which is the best theory for us to use?
So my class heard me say this. I'm a pragmatist, and that is actually a theory. So I look at whatever situation is and the research we're doing, and think about what is going to be best. So for example, if there's no research with a particular population on a topic area, so I'm trying to think of something that might be completely novel. I can't think of anything that's completely novel. So I'm going to choose one that's not novel, but just as an example. So smoking in pregnancy with Aboriginal women. Lots of research in this space, but let's pretend there's not. You might want to use grounded theory because it is getting all of the codes derived from the text to the point where they actually name the codes and use a description that's based on the text, because there's nothing to base it off. If you want to see whether or not a existing framework, that's say a whole of population approach with women who smoke in pregnancy, and you want to see if that works with a subpopulation, say refugees, young people, teenagers who are having babies, or Aboriginal people, you could actually take that to see whether or not it relates. So you're then using a deductive approach. There are a range of different theories, and we don't go into it in detail in this subject. We do a little bit, but not as much as, because there's so much in research that you can go into. So what I suggest you do, if you want to know about theories and what's best, I would actually have a look in the literature to see what's being used with your population and with the types of questions. So you might just want to have a look at in your literature review what the methodologies that people used, and then I think that's probably the easiest way for you as students to determine what might be best suited for your particular research question. Does that answer?
So find something out there that's kind of similar to what we're proposing, and then look at how they've done it.
Yeah.
And see if it fits.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, that's what we do as researchers. So for example, when we're writing up our methodology section, and again, I'm an Aboriginal health researcher. So I write up that, you know, I use a participatory action research methodology because it's it is demonstrated through previous research to be the most appropriate with Aboriginal people. And I use a number of references for that, full stop. The reason why it's the most appropriate is because it allows for Aboriginal people to have input and control and act as participants and experts of their own lives. And then I put references around that. So yes, so find something that's similar, look at what they've done, and see if that will fit your project. You can't like copy them completely because no research project's the same, but it is something that we all do it in terms of research, because you want to know that the research works with both your population and to answer the question that you're looking to answer.
Yeah, so in that sense, you're also building on people's previous research and how they've used their methodology, and so you're contributing to that kind of a research body as well. Absolutely,
absolutely. In the project that I'm working on at the moment, we're actually potentially going to be using a novel approach, so a new approach. So we're actually looking at adapting a realist evaluation approach for the case study component of the commissioning, because we like the bit that it talks about context, object, and what's this? I can't even remember it now. Sorry, I've drawn a blank, but there's a component in there. But what we don't like about it is how fixed they have structured interviews, and that won't work within an Aboriginal context. So what we're looking to do is actually trial an adapted realist approach, which we then can write up as a methodology about what worked or didn't work. And so that way we're actually starting to generate new theory. But that's not for you guys. You're not here to generate new theory. You're here to demonstrate that you understand the processes and the elements of a research project.
Yep, that makes sense.
So yeah, see, it's not copying to use a similar method, but you do need to justify why you're using it within your cohort and for your question, which is why it will not be plagiarism.
Yep. Good, thank you.
No problem. Has anyone else got any questions in relation to the decolonising? So let's get to decolonising. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it was that you found challenging? I'm trying to remember who asked me about the decolonising? Sorry, I should have written the name down and I'm drawing a blank. Are you still there? Whoever asked me about the decolonising? Okay, come back to that. Content related stuff. Who else has got some questions about the content to date? Anything they've found challenging? Anything that we need further explanation or clarity around? Drop-in sessions, no fun if no one asks me questions. Diego, you spoke before. Do you have any questions?
No, I'm honestly reviewing the method, the modules as you're giving your explanation, and I don't have any questions at the moment.
Okay.
But that's my fault because I haven't written down the question, like whatever is not clear while I review the materials. So I'll start doing that.
No problem. Because this is your session to like opportunity, because obviously we put up information that we think is going to be helpful, but if there's a point of clarity or if we can offer that. Again, we can't necessarily always be comprehensive, because like if it is about a particular methodology in detail, the best port is actually the library, because as much as I would like to think that I'm a fountain of knowledge, I'm not really as comprehensive as a library. So thank you for that. Neha, do you have anything that you wanted to ask? I'm going to pick on people. I'm just going to pick on you.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you about the methods. Actually, I've attended the lab on yesterday. So, yeah, I also wanted to ask you about that ethnography that I don't know which person has asked you before that question, but yeah, little struggling in some of the methods because I don't know, it's a particular new content for me, so that's why.
Are you coming as are you a public health student, a social work, or can't remember?
From public health.
Public health. And what's your undergrad degree in?
It's in microbiology.
No wonder ethnography is challenging.
Yeah.
So you're predominantly a quantitative, like you would probably align yourself with quantitative methodologies. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just pulling up now. I'm going to see if I can find something. What I'm going to do, if ethnography is challenging for people, what I'm going to do is find a really good paper on ethnography, and I'll post it in the teachers' announcements, if that's okay.
Yeah.
With any of the qualitative stuff, if you're a quant person, this is going to take a little bit of time to get your head around.
Yeah.
I will find some articles for you to read.
Can I say something, Summer?
Sure, Lisa.
I'm actually not quite sure if this is a subject that I should be doing. Yeah,
You're doing public health?
I'm doing public health, but it's a postgraduate diploma. Yeah, and I'm not sure this is what I should be doing. However, I'm still trying to find my way. I'm trying to get my head around it. So I have an extension I had to ask for an extension on the assessment one.
Yeah. Lisa, this is a conversation probably for your APD. So that's the person who, or for Joe Russell, head of students. So you need to speak to, in terms of whether this subject is for you, I would encourage you to speak to Lisa. What's Lisa's last? Smithers?
Right.
Or to Joe Russell, who's head of students. And census is coming up. So census date is the 31st of August. So you have 7-8 days to decide whether or not you want to stay in this subject, or you'll get, or there'll be fees.
So it's Joe Russell, did you say?
Joanne Russell, yeah, or Lisa. So she's the head of students.
All right. Well, thanks very much for that. Okay. Yeah. Well, I might leave the drop-in session now, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine, Lisa. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
See ya. So just a little bit on ethnography. And again, this is not where I do my research. So this is a very basic, like with all qualitative stuff, it's a study of people, culture, social, and it's often done through making meaning, like it creates meaning through the method. So whether that's observation, whether or not that's a survey, whether it's not, it's a semi-structured interview. So it's really a study of people, culture, subcultures, subgroups of populations. And it helps you make meaning of the way people operate as an individual, not at an individual level, but at a collective level. But yes, I will find some books or papers that do it better justice. So it's often used by anthropologists, but it does actually come into other fields like health and education. And I found a book here. So I am going to, you'll need to log into the university library to access this, but you can download the book. So there is a book and it's called Ethnography at Work. So that might be a good start because it's actually, a research, I've put in there twice, a research project that explains ethnography in practice. So essentially you're making meaning. So unlike quantitative, which will tell you what's happening, i.e. X number of the population are likely to develop diabetes by X. So you might, this will tell you, this is about making meaning. So it's about the why and the how. Is that any, I mean, I know that's a very broad description, but does that help you at all, Neha?
It's a bit confusing because like in qualitative methods, I don't know how, like it is an appropriate method if I'll include this method in my research question. So I am confused in that, like, should I include ethnography or should I not? Because I am not able to understand what is exactly it is. So
if you don't understand it, I would suggest you don't include it unless you do a lot more reading around it. Your research question should determine what kind of methodology and methods you're going to use. So, for example, if you want to understand prevalence or incidence, then you wouldn't use ethnography because it won't allow you to do that. But you would use a quantitative approach, and you would probably do, depending on it, you might do a clinical audit, for example. So you really need to be driven by your question. Your question dictates what kind of methods and methodology you should be using.
okay.
What was your, so, I mean, we're going to give you some feedback in assessment 1 when we get it to you, which will help you understand where you're at a bit further.
Yeah. Patty actually suggested me some methods. So yeah, sure.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Anyone else got any questions for me? You can put them in the chat if you don't want to speak, or if your internet's a bit unstable.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Go for it. Love you too.
Thank you. So it's not related to modules, but I would really appreciate if you can share your strategies on how to build a literature review, because if we can search with answering keywords, there can be so many literature, it's overwhelming, and I think we can't read all of that. So
yeah. I appreciate that. That's a really good question. So my advice to you, and particularly this will be consistent advice for a range of different reasons, you need to have your topic of interest. Let's just say it is physical activity, right? So you're interested in physical activity. What are you interested in? This is that mind map that we've done. There's all these things about physical activity that you can do. So we then ask you, and this was in assessment 1, to identify a population. So you could do yes, that's fine to leave the class, no problem. If you need to leave, feel free to just leave. So the way you do it is by narrowing it down. So if you were to do a literature search, I would highly recommend that you have a time frame around it. So you might actually think about having a time frame of 5 years or 10 years. And because what you want to do is actually have the most up-to-date literature. Something from 50 years ago, unless you're doing a historical study, is not particularly relevant to today. So then also what you might want to do is think about narrowing down the population further by looking at it, say, amongst women, and you can narrow it down even further by looking at it by geography. So you might look at them in Australia. So by looking at narrowing your population will actually reduce the scope of the articles that have come up. So it's really important to make sure that you're really specific and you're using the advanced search in, and you also might want to actually make sure that they're all peer-reviewed literature. You can use grey literature, but that's another way of narrowing it down, because it won't pick up media articles, press releases. Okay. Varash has asked a question here about bias. So how do we calculate bias and how do we prevent bias in our research studies? I'm going to answer the last part first. How do we prevent bias in our research studies? Different schools of thought have different opinions on this. You can't prevent bias. And if I understand what you're asking here, so bias is in how you're, are you doing a quant or a qual or your mixed methods, Barash?
Mixed method.
So with mixed methods, there's different biases potentially. So for example, if you're doing quantitative data and you're doing a survey, for example, there can be biases in your sample. So there can be biases because you're not collecting, so you're doing a phone survey and you're only using landlines, which means that young people aren't likely to answer it. So you're going to get a bias and a sample bias in that. So you're going to end up with probably older people. So you want to think about making sure that you, when you're designing your research project, that you avoid sample bias by ensuring as much as you can, and it's never completely impossible to, it's not completely possible to remove bias. But you might want to think about, if you're doing a survey, you might want to think about doing mobile phones, which more people have, which will mean that you're more likely to have a representative sample. And if you don't get a representative sample, there are ways of adjusting the data called weighting to improve that. And again, that's not my area of expertise, but there are ways of doing the analysis which will adjust for that bias. If there's also bias in the things that you choose to include or exclude, if you're talking about, or the way the data that you choose. So for example, you might choose to take a whole of population approach and you then discard the outliers if you're doing quantitative. Now the outliers could be a particular cohort. So you might find the outliers might be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in a whole of population study, and you've just disregarded the Aboriginal people because, without realizing it, because they have a very different approach, like very different result than the rest of the population. So in terms of quantitative data, I highly encourage you to really look at your data and become familiar with your data and be really open to different ways of analysis to ensure that you're not actually introducing bias unnecessarily or avoidably. In qualitative data, their bias is often it's a little bit different. So when we're looking at bias, we're thinking about our individual norms. So we often call that positionality or standpoint. And so we're thinking about, when we're looking at qualitative data, are we interpreting the data in the way that it was communicated with us, with the meaning that was meant to, like that the interviewee intended it to be communicated with, or are we interpreting it based on our own worldview and experiences? So one of the ways you can actually reduce in qualitative data is bias is by actually having, so if you're a non-Aboriginal person but you're doing research in an Aboriginal space, make sure there's Aboriginal people there working with you to interpret the data, design the data, so you're asking the right questions, you're not just asking the questions and that you think are good but actually aren't good for the population, and actually analysing that data and writing it up. You have, you know, your population where it's young people, Aboriginal people, refugees involved in that to make sure it's interpreted in the way it was as it was communicated with you. So that's really that. And how do we calculate? That's a question I'm not actually able to answer. I would need to, that is something that I am not so familiar with. Did I help you out, Rash?
Yeah, so what is hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry, I just said your name wrong. My apologies.
Okay. What is the estimated amount of bias we can have in our research studies?
That's not a question we normally ask. So I'm not really understanding what you're asking me. I'm really sorry.
Like how much bias we can have in our research studies. If it's too much, like how do we prevent that much, like an estimated amount of bias?
So your methodology should always be aiming to reduce bias. So it always should be front of mind. You can't calculate that like you can similarity of plagiarism. What you would do if you were writing up a research proposal or a paper with results findings, you would actually note the limitations, which will be, it's a small sample size, so therefore it may not be generalizable to the broader population. So it's really about being reflective on pre and post. So when you're designing it, you need to be, you can't calculate it like you're asking, but you can be aware of bias and learn how to mitigate those biases like you would do a risk assessment and mitigation strategies.
All right, thank you.
That's right. We've got 12 minutes. Who wants to ask me another question? How is everyone aware that assessment 2 is due in week 7?
Yes, on September 8th.
I didn't remember the date, so thank you. That's fantastic. Is anyone unsure of how to do that, like where to find that assessment? Or can someone actually tell me what that assessment is?
We have to complete the modules on ethical research. Then it would take almost approximately 4 hours, and we have to submit the certificate within the due date.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That is spot on. You're either on Moodle or you have a photographic memory. That is excellent.
No, I read it before.
Is anyone unclear on what they need to do for assessment 2? Because this is an opportunity to ask me.
Yes, may I ask a question? So it's, as I know, it's for 4 hours. So can we do it like by separately, let's say 1 hour per day, if you don't have like time to do continuously for 4 hours, or it should be finished like once and in 4 hours?
No, so you can actually stop at any point. So there's a number of modules within it, and within those modules, there is stuff for you to read, watch, etc. And then there is a quiz at the end, and you have to get a certain number. Like sometimes it's 10 out of 10, sometimes it's 9 out of 10. So you can actually even stop the quiz halfway through and come back to it. So no, at any point you can stop and come back to it. So you don't have to do it in a full sitting. The only thing I would say is we are asking people to submit it by the due date. So unless you have it, you can apply for an AC or an extension and meet the AC. Yes, you can.
Is it possible to redo the quiz? Suppose if you cannot get this 9 out of 10 means, is it possible to redo the quiz?
Absolutely. You can redo the quiz as many times until you get it right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, so you can, yes, I've got 2 questions there. So yes, you can retake it. So there's on Moodle, underneath assessment 2 tab is the guidelines that was very expertly outlined before by, I'm not sure who, but whoever it was, that was fantastic. So there shouldn't be too many problems with that. So you need to go on Moodle and find that information. Now, I'm going to talk about academic writing just briefly. So if you think you're good at academic writing, actually, I'll just ask, is there any other questions before I talk about academic writing? Don't be shy. Nope. Okay. I'm going to talk about academic writing briefly. I know that different universities, particularly in different countries, have different expectations. Here at the University of Wollongong and generally across Australia, we expect what we consider to be academic writing is students being able to use the information that they have read, say do a literature review, and then do what we call a synthesis. So you're not actually saying exactly what someone else has said, you're actually putting it in your own words and explaining it, and then using the source as to reference it. I have to say, we noticed in assessment 1 that there was a lot of people that weren't paraphrasing well enough. So that is taking something and putting it in your own words. And they were directly copying information from websites or peer-reviewed articles or books and putting it in without actually assigning it as a quote, which is the only way you can actually put something in without paraphrasing. So, and also with referencing, there is a Harvard referencing guide on Moodle under subject information, which is the way we expect you to reference. Also on the University of Wollongong Library website, there is information about how you actually reference. Referencing is important. If you don't reference, it's like stealing somebody else's work. You have to attribute and acknowledge the original authors of whatever thought it is that you're including, or everything that you include. So if you're talking about a policy, for example, you need to reference that policy. Let's say it's the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Plan 2021 to 2023. That was actually written by the Department of Health. So you would reference the Department of Health, and that was published in 2021. That's your in-text referencing in brackets, and then you'd put the full citation in your reference list at the end. So I actually am going to, in a number of my students, and I know students from other tutorials, you're going to see a lot of, you need to know how to, you need to reference better, you need to learn how to paraphrase. Student Services has a range of different services available, and so does the library, to support you in your academic writing. And this is a master's subject, so we do expect a higher level of understanding around this than what we would for an undergrad, because the expectation is that you have actually done academic writing in your undergrad. Does anyone have any questions around that? I got a thumbs up from somebody. Okay, thanks, Kathy. Look, we've got 5 minutes left, but I don't fancy sitting here in silence. Does anyone? Yep, Robina, go for it if you need. That's fine. Does anyone have any final questions that they want to ask me? Otherwise, I might just close it down. No problem. Have a good evening.
I actually have a quick question.
Sure, Claire. Hello.
Hi. I'm curious if you could just explain a bit more actually about the critical reflections, because I know we have more of those coming, and I've never had to do them before in my undergraduate degree, and I'm just wondering, like, is there any context for which you would do a critical reflection outside of a university, or is it only in a university that exists? Like,
no, critical reflection is a vital part of research.
But I mean, sorry, the actual, like, do you mean like the act of it, or do you mean like the writing of it down of it? Because I've never had to do that before, and it's novel to me, the submission of the thought process.
What's your undergrad?
I did neuropsychology, but it was in America, so
I gather the accent. Yeah. Critical reflection is a key part of a lot of practice, like social work in particular. So they do a lot of critical reflection. It should be, so the doing of it should be a part of everyone's best practice when working with clients. It's important that we always reflect on how we got to where we got and what were some of the challenges, for example, or some of the things that changed our mind. We often are working with populations that may not actually be our own, or we might be, so there's this theory called insider outsider. So you can be inside a subgroup or a cultural group and have an understanding. So therefore you don't need to actually do as much sense checking and making there's an assumed knowledge versus an outsider. So, and sometimes you're an insider and outsider. So I'm a woman who's had a baby, but I'm from a city, but so I wouldn't necessarily understand. So I'd understand some of the same stuff of a woman who's got a baby in a remote setting, but it would be different because they're remote. So there's this stuff. So it's part of our journey and self-discovery to make sure that we're better practitioners by understanding what influences the way we see the world and how we might be able to challenge that. And in terms of writing it down, social workers probably do it more than everybody else. And outside of that, it would be within the research space because it's what we call standpoint or positionality. So it's actually being able to critique and understand, again, our worldview and how that might influence or bias the way we're actually doing research or analysing data. Even within a quantitative setting, for example, we need to be really checking our biases, which is partly why we do the critical reflection. For example, there was a paper that came out of the University of Sydney that was doing a comparison study on investment in hospitalisations to reduce poor health outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people versus, in their words, investments in lifestyle choices. So smoking cessation programs, healthy eating programs, all that kind of stuff. The math was fine. Their discussion, however, was problematic because they said that a defining characteristic of Aboriginal people is their poor lifestyle choices. So Aboriginal culture is not about poor choices. That is external to culture. And so they didn't reflect or critically analyse or check their own biases. So it is vital to research. If you're not going to be a researcher, the way you would use this is by actually being able to look at research papers and have a think about whether or not this is methodologically sound, i.e., is it, say, a man investigating women's experiences of mammograms where they can't really understand what that would mean, or a woman doing a study looking at men's decision-making process around prostate cancer treatment. Again, you can empathise, but it doesn't have that lived experience. So you would be able to actually use these skills to actually critique an article, even if you're not going to be a researcher yourself. And I don't know how relevant that is to your research question or space. It's varying levels, I would suggest, across different spaces. Long answer, sorry, Claire.
No, that was good. That's what I was going after. That's good. Thank you.
Look, critical reflection is natural to some people and not natural to others. I certainly didn't find it natural. It's very learned for me because I'm just a doer. Like, I just do shit, right? But I have to say, even though I'm not naturally inclined to do it, I do value it now that I've learned to do it but it's been hard. And it's not just, can I just say, critical reflection is not just documenting your experience from X, Y, and Z. This happened and this happened and this happened. This happened and then it made me think about this and it made me a bit uncomfortable. And then the reason why it made me uncomfortable is because it challenged a well-held notion of mine. And then I got to realise that actually I held that notion because of stereotypes. And now I'm realising that actually the stereotype isn't reality. That's stuff we're looking for. Anyway, it's 2 minutes past. Has anyone got any final questions, or shall we all say goodbye?
Yeah, because we have a ELL tutorial now.
Okay, no problem. You've got to go. That's absolutely fine. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate those that have contributed.
For that last bit, Summer, I really appreciated that. It really made me feel like, okay, it's fine if I don't get it yet. I just need to do the thing.
Yeah. Can you just stay on the line for a little bit?
Yeah, cool. Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. And I'm just going to let everybody else go. So everyone, see you later. And I'm going to turn off the recording now. We don't need to record.